Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, we are going to first take this question. Let's discuss this. And then we will continue with Indian economy. So, this is question 1C of the paper 2021. Okay. So, the question goes ahead and says examine the relationship between business cycle and changes in autonomous expenditure. Okay. Now, before we begin, you notice that the questions are not very straightforward, right? I mean, we have studied what business cycle is. We have studied what is autonomous expenditure, but never it may never seem to you to directly go ahead and directly link the two, isn't it? We never go ahead and we try and we link these two things together. Rare. I mean, we talk about business cycle and how aggregate demand and how aggregate demand and income change, but these questions are very indirect kind of questions, right? So I think it's a good practice for you to see how the question can be twisted and asked in exam, right? Okay, so autonomous expenditure is defined as spending that is independent of the current income level. It comprises autonomous consumption, investment, government spending, and export. Fluctuation in these autonomous components are a primary driver of business cycle movement in the economy. Okay. According to Keynes' theory, changes in autonomous expenditure initiates expansion or contraction in the economy. A rise in investment boosts aggregate demand while fall reduces it. So here, one thing which I want to highlight is that um, when you go ahead and when you talk about any theory, like you're talking about Keynesian theory or you're talking about, uh, what is autonomous consumption, expenditure, etc., it will be a good idea to go ahead and to write them. So you remember that when we were talking about autonomous consumption, we said it is C bar, autonomous investment is I bar, G, X bar, M bar. Just wherever you mention these components, in bracket, just mention their symbols as well. This will help us use these symbols later on, right? Okay. So such a change in autonomous expenditure creates a magnified change in output through the multiplier effect. Okay, makes sense. A rise in autonomous spending increases income, causing rise in consumption, generating further spending. These output changes feed back into investment through the accelerator effect, rising output and higher capacity use. During falling output stages, investment falls, and thus depending on this. Okay. So it's a good answer, but I have certain more things that we need to highlight, right? So first of all, so please understand, whenever we talk about a business cycle heavily depends on what we call as a shock. And these shocks that I'm talking about, the shock can be temporary or the shock can be permanent. So you remember the consumption theories that we have done. Whenever there is a temporary change in your income, one time change in your income, it will not feed through consumption. But whenever there is a permanent change in your income, it will feed through consumption, right? So when we go ahead and when we talk about this, that there is a rise in spending, increasing income, and this causes rise in consumption, here you must go ahead and you must differentiate between temporary versus permanent shock, right? This is important, okay? Because if the change is temporary, it's a one-time change. So it will not feed through income, feed through the next level of consumptions and investment in that case, right? That's the first thing. So if I were you here, I would have said that there are two kind of shocks. I would have said that there are two kind of shocks. A, temporary. B, permanent, right? In case of temporary, in case of temporary change, temporary shock, what happens is that there is, these are short-term changes, right? So in this case, they are short-term changes and they do not alter the long-term path of the economy. They do not uh, change the long-term path of the economy. Okay. For example, you can go ahead and say that a sudden fall in export, just one time fall in export due to, like during the period of COVID, brief global slowdown. It's just a one time fall in export, right? Or a temporary fiscal stimulus. That means one time government spending, right? Or say a short term investment dip. So like you mentioned here, like that there is an impact of business confidence, right? So maybe the government is changing. You're going from one government to another, and during that switch from one government to another, for a short period of time, there is some uncertainty in the economy. So short-term investment dip due to uncertainty in economy. Okay. So whenever we have these temporary shocks, right? These temporary shocks, yes, they will also act through the multiplier, because the moment you will increase G, yes, definitely there is going to be increase in Y and there is going to be a multiplier effect, right? So they will act through the process of multiplier. They will cause expansion or contraction, but these changes in the business cycle, these will only be short term. Okay, so these will be single cycle deviations. This will lead to single cycle deviation, right? These will not be having any permanent change, any long-term change, right? But when we talk about these permanent shocks, so I've linked it to business cycle. I have said that these are all autonomous changes and they're leading to change in business cycle, but it's a single cycle deviation. Now, when we talk about permanent shocks, they cause lasting changes in autonomous expenditure. Okay, so in this case, because the change is permanent, you will have long run trajectory changes. So how can we go ahead and how can we show this? So Mani, just imagine this, huh? So I think you drew business cycle somewhere. So if you look here, this is a business cycle, but the trajectory of this economy in the long run is upward. GDP is increasing, right? So this is a trajectory. This is a trend, long run. Now, when we do a permanent change, when we do a permanent shock, then we have the ability to change this long run aspect of the business cycle, not only the short run aspect. Short run is just this cycle. Short run ठीक है, but we are able to go ahead and we are able to change the trajectory of the economy as a whole. Is it making sense? So we have to mention that here. So we have to say that when we talk about permanent shocks, these have lasting changes. They change the long run trajectory of, so long run trajectory changes in demand, investment, output, etc. So in this case, permanent cycles, they have deeper, this changes deeper and persistent cycle. Right? These not only lead to cyclical movement, but they actually change the structure of the economy. Just during LPG policies, it was a permanent shock, right? We moved all the way from government companies towards the privatized sector. So it changed, it was a structural shift altogether, right? So this does not change the long-term path. This does not change the cyclical movements. But when we talk about the permanent one, it changes the cyclical movement changes, but plus it also changes the structural movements. So there is a structural shift in the economy. Okay. Here permanent rise can be what? Permanent rise can be, say, government building a increase in G to build a road flyover. So it's a, the government will keep injecting money, keep building the road, right? Or suppose there is a structural change in export. Money, suppose there is an increase in population of my neighboring country. So permanently they have increased my export. Right? There is some change in demography of my trading partner. ठीक है? Or permanent change in technology innovation, which increases investment. Or permanent cut in government expenditure. Right? Permanent increase भी हो सकता है, permanent cut भी हो सकता है. Right? Like austerity. ठीक है? Like long-term negative shock, like deindustrialization. We are going back away from industrialization. Okay. So in this case, when we have a permanent shock, then your answer makes more sense, because here then we have a double impact. We have multiple effect, multiplier effect, but it is also followed by an accelerator effect. Right? So we create multiple rounds of accelerator effect. We magnify the cycle. Okay. We create long-term investment behavior changes, right? And we not only change the cycle, but also the trajectory or trend, right? So this, there is a change in the trend, or there is a change in the trajectory, right? So you have to understand that when we talk about temporary shock, it has a multiplier effect, agreed. It multiplier effect can be large, but it will only be one time. It will decline with time. Accelerator effect will also be weak, because firms will know that this effect will fade out with time. Okay? Economy will return to its previous trend. But when we have a permanent shock, multiplier effect will be there in every period. Accelerator effect will be strong, because firms will keep revising their expectations upwards and onwards. output will adjust to the new equilibrium path. Your path will change, your trajectory will change. Man, if I was going at this trajectory and I bring some permanent increase in output, I'm going at this trajectory and I bring some permanent increase in the autonomous spending, my trajectory will change. I may have a upward sloping trajectory itself, right? So output will adjust to this new equilibrium path, right? And therefore this business cycle which has been going on, ये जो business cycle यहाँ चल रहा है, it will adjust itself to the larger trajectory. So its amplitude will be higher. It will be more persistent, right? So I was expecting a bit on this aspect, huh? So you have to explain both temporary and permanent shock. So yes, the answer seems fine, but I hope that you understand that we need to distinguish and show these two things. In both of them, you will talk about autonomous expenditure, and how it links to your business cycle and trajectory of business cycle. Okay. Okay. Any doubt in this? Anything which is not clear?